Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Dick Duvall.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to appear before you, and thank you for coming to this program, even though Marco said we should be charging next year. Maybe we'll do that, but we're happy to have convened this, and I think it really establishes the American Red Cross as a major voice in convening the community regarding disaster relief and preparedness. I'm very proud also to serve as chair of the American Red Cross Board for the National Capital Region. This is an advisory board. We have about 30 members. If you're a member and you're in the audience still, please raise your hand. We've got a number of people here. This is a board-driven initiative to start with. I think it's been extremely successful. The staff has been unbelievable pulling this off, and not just this year, but last year as well. And so I wanted to thank both the staff and the board members for their work on this. My role right now is to introduce Richard Serino. Richard is providing what lawyers would say the closing argument, but the closing statement. We've had Brad on opening, Richard on closing. We've got two of the top two experts in the world on disaster relief and management. Richard Serino has connections to two universities. And if you look at the rankings of worldwide universities, they're both in the top 5. One is Harvard and the other is MIT. He's a senior distinguished fellow at Harvard with the T.H. Chan School of Public Health in their National Preparedness Leadership Initiative. At MIT, he's a senior advisor with their Risk Lab. He helps devise approaches for resilience to communities across the world. He has served the federal government as Deputy Administrator of FEMA. He was appointed by President Obama in October of 2009 and served for 5 years. He's served for over 36 years in Boston with the Emergency Medical Services, rising to the level of chief. He's responded to over 60 disasters. I guess if you're in this business, you start logging the disasters that you've responded to, but his include Sandy, his include the Boston Marathon. We're very happy and honored to have Richard down here, and I want to ask him to come on up. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Wait a minute, afternoon. I just want to first off thank you all for coming today. And it's a pleasure for me to be back here in the NCR. I spent some time at FEMA yesterday, DHS, COG, as well as with people from CISA, and a lot of people EMS and EM and PH. Well, I'm good to be back in Washington, D.C., just to get that acronyms all out of me now. You know, it's when I got here to FEMA, and Brad can attest, I was like an acronym deficient. So coming back here just to get my fix over the last couple of days is great. And the time I spent here in D.C., I experienced the derecho, the earthquake, snowmageddon, and probably the worst is a prediction of 2 inches of snow. I don't know what happens to this city when that happens. It's like everybody panics. But I will say one thing that impresses me is you. Everybody in this room. I want to say thank you, because you make a difference. You make a difference in people's lives. Some of you save lives. Some of you make their lives a little bit easier. But each and every one of you make a difference. How many people do you know when you go out with friends or go to a game or whatever you do, and people who aren't in this world? you make a difference. So I want to say thank you, because that's one thing we all, I spent years in public safety and emergency management, we don't say thank you enough. We don't acknowledge each other. And that can have bad consequences going forward. So every once in a while, turn to the people you work with and say thank you. It's more powerful than you think. Take the opportunities to do that when you can. Just say thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about, he mentioned the Boston Marathon. I was the deputy administrator at FEMA at the time, and I happened to be back in Boston that day. Just pure chance. And I had been the incident commander for the Boston Marathon for too many years to count. And being back there that day, and the response to the marathon was no accident. It was no accident that the 262 people that survived that incident are still alive. 3 people that died during the bombing died instantaneously. Every single other person survived. It was no accident that we were trained in the use of tourniquets, and this was before Stop the Bleed, that helped generate Stop the Bleed. A bunch of us got together. It was no accident that the Medical Intelligence Center was open to communicate with the hospitals. It was no accident that we had drilled almost the exact same scenario years before. It was no accident. And when you look at preparedness, it's not an accident. Work goes into that. You're here because of preparedness in the work that needs to be done. Some people in this room have been doing it, yes, for decades. I've seen some old friends today. Joe, I don't know where you are, I can't see you. But people have been doing this for decades. We have to continue. The threat is real. The threat is different. Some of the old threats and new threats. And one of the things after the marathon is the colleagues I work with at Harvard now, they went and talked to all the leaders that respond, from the governor to the mayor, state police superintendent, Boston Police Commissioner, 34 of the leaders, including myself, on the response to the marathon. And one thing that they noticed, after talking to everybody and listing out pretty consistent themes, there were 5 things that came out of it. Something that they called swarm leadership. If you think of swarms, how people work together, and listening to people this morning, what goes on in the National Capital Region is a swarm of people who come and work together. First thing is a unity of mission. For the marathon, it was save lives. For what you do every day, it's a version of saving lives. Second was having people stay in your own lanes, doing what you do best, but then helping others succeed. How can I help make you a success? During the marathon, during the first day of that week-long event, it's against the law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for police to transport injured patients to the hospital. There were 50 ambulances, and they were overwhelmed. So police officers put people in police cars. Only just 2 or 3. But they saved lives. The injuries from those incidents, a large number of people should have died, they didn't. Because there was also no accident that they were evenly distributed to all the different hospitals. Evenly distributed to all different hospitals. So one hospital wasn't overwhelmed. That was no accident. So the third thing is having that generosity of spirit in action. Taking the opportunity for people to, how can I help? In the public at large. Not just that day, hotels around the area, everybody helped. That generosity of spirit in action. There was one incident on the Friday when the search was going on and the shootouts that happened and the murder of a police officer and the death of a police officer that died a year later. What happened when people went in to search their homes and went into, if you remember, the city of Boston, 8 surrounding towns around Boston were shut down at 5 a.m., shut down. Nobody was allowed to go in or out. The people were asked to do it. There was not an order. In every city and town, the streets were a ghost town. And one of the things that, talking to the survivor, talking to some of the leadership, specifically the police leadership, said that they were surprised by and upset about is they didn't take care of their troops. We had 2,000 law enforcement officials in the city, and they didn't provide them with water and food. When we went back to investigate and talk to the police officers, they had all the water they wanted, all the food they wanted, and the bathroom facilities. They'd walk into people's homes after they searched it, and they say, you want to use the restroom, want a sandwich, want some water. The generosity spirit, that's just one of literally hundreds of examples. The fourth was no ego, no blame. One thing I found when I came to DC, that if you had no ego and you didn't care who got credit, you'd get anything done. During the marathon, there wasn't one person in the leadership, pretty much throughout the city, that blamed somebody else. I take the blame as much as the ego. Having nobody get up and say, you screwed up, and nobody, hey, we're doing this, we did this, our department did this. It was everybody coming together. And the fifth, and I think perhaps the most important, is having trusted relationships. The value of trusted relationships. Everybody talked a lot about relationships here today. Really important. Trusted relationships are key. How you develop those relationships and develop that trust. It takes work. It's not easy. It takes time. And you can develop them, believe it or not, in a crisis sometimes quickly. During the marathon, I remember we were in the Westin Hotel about maybe 20 minutes after the bombs went off. In the leadership from the mayor, the governor, all the police leadership, all the agencies, federal, state, local. And I had one person from FEMA with me. And one of the police superintendents looked over and says, you, who are you? And I said, oh, she's with me. Oh, okay. Everybody else in the room knew each other. They knew me because I spent my career there. I was in a different role. Other than that one person, the only person in the room I didn't know was the FBI SAC, special agent in charge of the Boston office. He came after I left, so we didn't know each other. We very quickly, the way he was accepted, the way he saw I was accepted, so that went away. So swarm leadership is what I see happening here in the National Capital Region. How do we all come together? And how do we come together on a regular basis? Makes a difference in people's lives. We touched on a little bit the coronavirus. Those trusted relationships are going to prove to make a huge difference. Hopefully not, but all signs looks like you're going to need to work on those relationships. And somebody mentioned earlier to look at how do we do and look at previous incidents. How many here have participated in an Afteraction Report? How many people here participated or read an Afteraction Report? Sometimes Afteraction works, perhaps, are a work of fiction. Anybody that's ever been to an incident and then read the Afteraction Report? Was I at the same incident? I take it people have done that before. I'm not saying don't read them. I'm saying absolutely read them. But don't just read the Afteraction Report. If there was something that you wanted to learn, go pick up the phone and call the people. Because after-action reports get filtered. If you don't know that, they do. But talk to the people that were involved. They would love to talk to you, almost anybody. I had the opportunity during the Ebola outbreak to be here in my role at Harvard, leadership stuff, is talking with the President's Homeland Security advisor at the time, on the National Security staff, the physicians in charge, and a bunch of assistant secretaries and deputy secretaries in government. Some of our colleagues went down to CDC and spent some time with them. But then I went down to Texas, and I did a think tank call, but I talked to the local folks in Dallas, and including the state directors, public health, emergency management. Was there a bit of a disconnect between what CDC was saying and was happening at the local level? For those who don't know or don't remember, it was like this. As we move towards, hopefully not, but novel coronavirus, be prepared now. The one and Mary Ann mentioned it earlier, one thing we don't get back in a disaster is time. If you haven't dusted off your plans and you haven't started to look at what you're going to need for the coronavirus, 5.5 million people in this area, they're trying to quarantine 50 million. They're building 2 hospitals in 30 days. Could we build 2 hospitals in 30 months? Probably not. I'm not just saying here, that's pretty much anywhere in this country. Understanding the issues. Understanding now for coronavirus. If you haven't started researching it, I don't care anybody in this room, if coronavirus hits the way it's hitting in China, we're going to be affected. You should be meeting now, developing relationships now. I heard some of the people, what I didn't hear specifically was what are you doing tactically? Nobody answered that question, by the way. Have to be reaching out now, developing the plans now. Because if you don't, when the time comes, and it may not be that far away, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. You have time now. In the disaster going forward, you're not going to have that time. As we think about what we do, sometimes, I'll say most of us, forget that it's about people. What we do is about people. We have to take care of ourselves, but we also have to take care of others. We get tied up so much, and as I just said, getting the plans done, doing what we have to do, we forget that what we do is about real people. We changed some terminology when we were at FEMA from victims, we used to call people victims, I did all the time, to survivors. Victims are unfortunately people who pass away. Survivors has a whole different tone to it. I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I'm not a 2-time cancer victim. How I look at myself, how others look at me when you call somebody a survivor is different. Your job as leaders at any level is to remind folks you work with about its people. Brad has a fancy job. He's VP of everything at the Red Cross, Do It Response. I know he reminds people, his staff, it's about people. So we have to remember that. Brad mentioned earlier, one of the things we teach is people follow you. And it's true. And if you turn around and nobody's behind you, all you're doing is taking a walk. It's good to take walks. But on the flip side of that is turn that phrase around. Because a lot of times you want people to follow you, but you have to follow people as well. You have to take the opportunity to know, I don't care who you are, you're not always going to have the answers. You have to know when to turn that around and follow people. Because as a leader, and everyone in this room is, you can make a difference. People will follow you. And there's one last thing that Brad said I might take a little issue with, Brad. And everybody cheered when he said it, which is even scarier. Brad mentioned earlier that hope is not a plan. Does everybody agree with that? Hey, when Brad said it, everybody cheered. Hope is not a plan. You have to plan, you have to train, you have to exercise. And if you don't do that, you probably will fail. But also, don't underestimate the power of hope. What you do in your jobs every day, if you're a firefighter, if you're a paramedic, if you're a police officer, you're a public health person, you're an emergency manager, you're in corporate security, whatever you do, don't underestimate the power of hope. Because in a disaster, you give people food, water, sustainment. But what you do more than almost anything else they need is give them hope. Giving them hope by listening to them, showing that you care, makes a difference. It makes a difference with the survivors. It also will make a difference with the people you work with. Because the mental health issues of things that we have all seen and experienced, that many people should never do, but we have, will take an effect on you. And if you don't think so, you're fooling yourself. I've been there, I know. So take the opportunity that don't underestimate the power of hope. You can make a huge difference. You already have. As we start looking at new technologies and going forward, and we absolutely did, I'm a huge proponent, lots of new data. Use that data. Put it in useful information, by the way. People tend to forget that. Take that data, put it in useful. It reminds me of an incident with my son a few years ago. What's the score of the Red Sox game? I said 3-1. Who's winning? The Yankees or the Red Sox? 3. All the data, not the information. So I just want to leave you with, take care of yourself. Take care of the survivors that we are here for. And don't underestimate what you do in the power of hope. Thank you.